There's another issue that Rex Tillerson has, other than the fact that he sees the entire world like one big, basically gas station.
Well, it's related to that. So, I'm sure you have had people on talking about the Exxon New campaign.
Yes, a while back, and just remind people what this is. And this is
right.
Go ahead.
So, there were revelations that 35, 40 years ago, Exxon was in possession of evidence of the catastrophic effects of climate change. And they did not disclose this. They did not factor this into any of their investor reports, which, investors might be interested to know that there would be this catastrophic effect from the very business that they're invested in, which could lead to the dissolution of that business at some point in time.
Right, and we should say, let me just want to make one point here. But that's not presupposing that these shareholders would have some sense of like, well, I don't want to be investing in something that's going to end the planet. It is
no, it's
that
not money, right?
At one point, they realize like, hey, governments may say we can't afford to kill ourselves anymore with this,
right?
And we're going to have to promote, let's say, I don't know, solar or something.
Right, and there's a difference between lying to the public, for which it's hard to sort of sanction that in any real way, and lying to your own investors, where there's an entire apparatus set up at the Securities and Exchange Commission that tries to prevent you from lying to your own investors. So when Exxon put out materials that said, oh, climate change isn't a big deal, and we still believe that our business is viable, when they did that in investor communications, that becomes an actual issue. So the Exxon New campaign sought to sanction, to get attorneys general on board with prosecuting Exxon Mobil for failing to warn the public and failing to tell investors of the risks of climate change. And, Eric Schneiderman and some of his colleagues have been working on this. And in August, the Securities and Exchange Commission asked ExxonMobil for documents. And it was sort of related to this. It wasn't exactly the same. But what they were asking for were documents around how ExxonMobil calculates what they call their proven reserves. So if you go to any investor report of any oil company, the big thing that they mention there is the proven reserves. We have X billion barrels of oil available to us in the ground from different leases we have on different oil fields and wells that are inactive. And what this says to investors is that this is going to be a going business for a long, long time. And they put a dollar value to those proven reserves. Like, we have 8 billion barrels in the ground, and we expect the price over time to be this much per barrel, and that's how much value we own, basically. So two things is what the SEC wanted to look at. Two things relative to that. Number one, how Exxon factored in the cost of potential climate regulations. We have this Paris climate deal that 194 nations have signed, and even if the U.S. pulls out under Trump, you're still going to see countries where Exxon does business needing to cut their carbon emissions. And it could make it, difficult for Exxon to actually extract their oil from those areas of the world. It might be less economically viable, and so the question is, are they factoring in these costs in their communications to investors? And that's number one. Number two is the price of oil has fallen from $117 a barrel in middle of 2014 to something like $28 a barrel in the beginning of 2016. It's now sort of jumped back. OPEC announced a cut in production, but it's still only around 50 or 55. And Exxon Mobil has never taken a write-down on its reserves relative to that price. For example, companies like Chevron have taken a $50 billion write-down because the value of the reserves are suddenly not as valuable anymore if the price of oil is half what it was. So,
but couldn't Exxon argue that, well, our plan is to get Donald Trump elected and to install Tillerson in as Secretary of State, and he will be able to negotiate a drawdown in production with the Russians and OPEC, and the price will go up to $200 a barrel.
What's interesting about that is that that's actually the opposite of what Trump is promising in his campaign. He said that we're going to make America a great hub of oil production again. We're going to restart all this oil production. Now, the truth is that America has been ramping up its oil and gas production, but that would increase the supply, which would have downward pressure on the price. So, when you it's interesting to sort of play that out. That would be exactly what the Russians wouldn't want, is for America to continue to try to be this oil and gas power. It's what the oil and gas industry might want because they'd have a larger share of it. But what that means for Exxon is interesting. And, so in August, the SEC came out and they wanted these documents because they wanted to know the calculations, which nobody really understands. What are the calculations behind these proven reserves? If Exxon says we have $100 billion worth of oil and gas in the ground, what does that mean? How is that calculated in any way? And is it deceptive in some way to investors? And so that is sort of the basis of this investigation. Now, as you rightly point out, if Rex Tillerson is in the cabinet and Donald Trump is in control of announcing and confirming and appointing seats on the SEC, it's unlikely, let's say, that Exxon Mobil is brought up on charges by the SEC around this. There are already two vacancies on the SEC. Yeah, there are already two vacancies. A third, Mary Jo White, is leaving, and all of the top leadership of the SEC has announced their resignations as well in the wake of Mary Jo White's announcement.
Let me ask you this. The production of those documents, do they become public? I mean, in other words, like if Chevron, you say, has done this, they have at least discounted. I mean, yes, and I think everybody sort of accepts that, like, look, it's impossible to predict the future, but, after extended period of time where the price of oil is a quarter from what it was that you calculated the value of your reserves, one would expect at least a public, some type of
an alteration of some sort.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why I ask this is because I think to be fair, Donald Trump is going to inhibit the SEC's investigative power enough that even if Rex Tillerson wasn't the Secretary of State, that Exxon would have very little to fear going forward. But
and let's be even more candid, and that the SEC wasn't exactly this aggressive machine prior to Donald Trump's election.
Right.
So ExxonMobil probably didn't have anything to fear before this.
But it seems to me the big fear, if I was Exxon, it would be two-part. One, in terms of the Exxon knew, and I keep waiting for this, and I've talked to some people who around this, and I haven't heard anybody who's been able to give me a satisfactory answer. But the tobacco settlement was built around this notion that it could be brought by state attorney generals who were having to pay for states who were having to pay Medicaid costs of people who had smoked. And that's the way they developed, who had standing to raise this issue. And it seems to me there's an argument here, like, I mean, not that Pam Bondi's going to be terribly interested in this, but maybe you find Attorney General, maybe in New York, you could say, look, Hurricane Sandy, there's significant evidence that this will the sea walls, the sea level has risen. That's why we suffered $50 million worth of damage, whatever the number is.
Right.
And we're going to bring an action against Exxon. My question is if these documents are forced to be produced by the SEC, will the public have access to them even if the investigation is dropped because of the nature of these? And then do we getting basically like a version
I don't know
of discovery?
that you can bet on that. I mean, this becomes part of an investigative record. They exist. They could potentially be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, but it's, let's say, unlikely, especially if a case is not broad.
Right.
It's somewhat unlikely, it seems to me, that those documents, which the SEC can argue are part of, the internal deliberations of a private or public company, cannot, be revealed, citing, that this would, be trade secrets or corporate secrets or something like that.
All right, so I want to change topics here in a second, but before we do, are you aware of any senators? I'm not going to hold my breath in terms of the Republicans, but are there any Democrats who are going to be raising this during Tillerson's confirmation hearings?
I could see it coming up. I mean, someone like a Sheldon Whitehouse, who has been laser focused on climate change, or Brian Schatz, I could see them bringing this up. I mean, certainly the fact that you have an oil company executive becoming Secretary of State, that seems like something that, you could relate. If you think climate is a diplomatic issue, which it is, we have this accord with 190 countries. It seems like it should be part of the public debate, and we'll see where Democrats go with it.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Subscribe.